Christmas was the magic of loved ones gathering together, or perhaps it was simply the warmth of shared meals. I must confess, I've never been able to turn down my mother's famous pecan pie. But last Christmas was unlike any other. It became the moment when my entire world shifted on its axis. I wish I could claim shock, but deep down, I believe I had always sensed this day would come. My name is Victoria Hayes. I had just turned 35 that December, raising my 8-year-old son, Daniel, on my own. In my father's eyes, I had always been the family's greatest disappointment. My parents' home in Richmond, Virginia, embodied everything about classic Southern hospitality. The grand front porch wrapped around the entire structure, antique mahogany furniture filled every room, and decades of family photographs from 1980 onward created a timeline along the main corridor. During the holiday season, the entire house seemed to breathe with the sense of vanilla and evergreen. Perhaps that nostalgic atmosphere explained why I continued returning year after year, despite feeling like an outsider in my own family. That particular Christmas, the house overflowed with relatives. My brother Nathan and his wife Carmen had made the journey from Richmond, accompanied by their twin daughters, Lily and Rose, who were 6 years old and possessed an extraordinary talent for creating chaos wherever they went. Mother had dedicated her entire morning to perfecting the dining room presentation, arranging her finest porcelain and ensuring every guest had their designated place. The hearth crackled with warmth, the atmosphere heavy with the aroma of glazed ham, yet something felt fundamentally wrong. The moment I crossed the threshold, an unsettling energy surrounded me. Forced smiles and meaningful glances passed between family members, as though everyone anticipated some inevitable catastrophe. We gathered around the table at 2:30. Daniel wore his nicest button-down shirt, but before we had finished saying grace, he had already managed to spill gravy across his sleeve. I couldn't suppress my smile. He always tried his hardest, but he remained just a child navigating an adult world. I helped him settle into the smaller table positioned nearby, then claimed my seat beside Mother at the main dining table. The conversation felt strained and artificial. Carmen discussed the twins' piano lessons. Nathan boasted about his recent partnership at the accounting firm. Father responded with little more than occasional grunts, his attention focused entirely on his plate. I attempted to contribute by sharing an amusing story about Daniel's recent encounter with our neighbor's parrot, but my words were met with silence. Mother simply cast nervous glances toward Father. With each passing moment, the tension intensified. I tried concentrating on Daniel, observing as he quietly entertained himself with his toy airplane beneath the table, making it soar across the carpet. The twins whispered and giggled about some secret joke, while Nathan repeatedly checked his phone, likely monitoring football scores. For a brief period, I managed to ignore the uncomfortable atmosphere, reminding myself that I had survived far worse situations. I believed I could endure this as well, but then everything changed in an instant. Father suddenly brought his fist crashing down onto the table with such force that every piece of silverware jumped and Mother's crystal wine glass toppled over, sending deep red liquid spreading across the pristine white tablecloth. Complete silence enveloped the room. My pulse quickened dramatically, yet I remained perfectly motionless. Father rose from his chair and fixed his furious gaze directly upon me. "You are an absolute disgrace, Victoria. A single mother. Why can't you simply pull yourself together like everyone else?" His voice boomed louder than I had ever witnessed, reverberating throughout the entire room. For several seconds, nobody dared to move. Carmen's eyes widened in shock, and even Nathan appeared visibly uncomfortable. Daniel stopped playing mid-flight, sensing the dangerous shift in atmosphere, and looked up at me with those large, innocent dark eyes. I felt heat rushing to my cheeks, but I forced myself to maintain steady breathing. This wasn't Father's first explosive outburst directed at me, but never before had he chosen to humiliate me in front of the entire family. He continued his verbal assault, his voice growing even louder, as if he wanted the entire neighborhood to witness my shame. "We provided you with everything, and you simply threw it all away. You could have lived a respectable life, but you chose this path instead. You bring embarrassment to our family name every time you step through that door." I searched Mother's face desperately, hoping for some sign of support, but she merely stared down at her lap, nervously twisting her linen napkin between her fingers. Not a single person spoke in my defense. Nathan opened his mouth as though preparing to intervene, but then thought better of it, returning his attention to his untouched mashed potatoes. I reflected on all the countless times I had quietly rescued them from financial difficulties. The secret mortgage payments, the anonymous contributions toward Nathan's law school expenses, the brand new luxury car sitting in Father's driveway that he proudly showed off to his friends. None of them had any knowledge of the truth behind their comfortable lifestyle. They all assumed Father's retirement pension from his decades at the railroad company covered all their expenses. The realization stung deeply, but I understood that my days of hiding were finally over. Father's face turned an alarming shade of red as he leaned forward menacingly, pointing an accusatory finger directly at me. "Get out of this house immediately. You are no longer welcome here. Not until you fix your pathetic life and stop dragging this family's reputation down with your failures." I stood up slowly, working to keep my voice steady and controlled. My hands trembled slightly, but I refused to let anyone see my vulnerability. "Very well," I replied quietly. There seemed to be nothing more worth saying. I looked toward Daniel, who had begun to tear up from witnessing the frightening scene, and gently lifted him into my protective embrace. He clung to me desperately, confused and terrified by the sudden violence, but I whispered softly in his ear that everything would be perfectly fine. I retrieved our winter coats from the hallway closet, carefully helping Daniel into his small red jacket before collecting my purse. Not one family member moved to stop our departure. Not one person offered a farewell. As I stepped through the front door, the bitter December air struck my face like a physical blow. I walked deliberately down the wooden porch steps, my heels creating a rhythmic clicking sound, and continued to the car I had parked along the street. Daniel remained silent, clutching his toy airplane tightly against his chest. I secured him properly in his booster seat, took one final look at the house that had never truly felt like home, and experienced something completely unexpected. I wasn't filled with sadness. Not really. I felt liberated. They had no idea that their entire comfortable existence was built upon the foundation of money I had earned through my own hard work. The house, the vehicles, even the elaborate Christmas feast they had just shared, everything came from my business empire worth $94 million that none of them had ever bothered to inquire about. For years, I had allowed them to believe I was a complete failure simply because maintaining that illusion seemed easier than confronting their judgment. But now, as I drove away from the only family I had ever known, I experienced an overwhelming sense of relief. Christmas was supposed to celebrate the bonds of family. That day taught me it was really about discovering the courage to walk away when family no longer feels like a sanctuary. The truth is, my family never truly understood who I was as a person. Even during the years I lived under their roof, or when I visited for holidays and special occasions, I always felt like a stranger wearing someone else's identity. I could see it reflected in the way my mother would glance at me whenever I laughed too enthusiastically or shared stories about my professional life. I witnessed it in my brother's awkward, superficial questions, always maintaining politeness, but never showing genuine curiosity about my experiences. To them, I represented nothing more than the chaotic one, the mistake maker, the daughter who never quite fit into their narrow definition of what a Hayes family member should be. I was the woman who returned home with a child but no husband, the one with too many ambitious ideas and insufficient explanations for my unconventional choices. But what my family failed to realize, or perhaps simply chose to ignore, was that every late-night email I sent, every business call I took at unusual hours, and all those mysterious trips to New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles weren't escapes from responsibility. They were the carefully laid building blocks of something truly extraordinary. I had learned early in life to conceal my ambitions, to tuck them away in places where nobody could criticize them or find fault with my dreams. From the outside, my world appeared quiet and unremarkable, but internally, it buzzed with secret plans and boundless energy. The foundation of everything began 6 years ago in a cramped, drafty apartment on the outskirts of Phoenix. I was 29 years old, recently separated, expecting a baby, and possessed just enough money in my savings account to cover rent for perhaps 2 more months. On a stormy Thursday evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a second-hand laptop and a notebook filled with scattered ideas, I launched my first online business venture, a digital marketplace connecting independent American artisans with customers worldwide. I named it Crimson Coast, inspired by a destination I had always dreamed of visiting, and poured every ounce of my energy into making that vision a reality. I taught myself web development through online tutorials, wrote compelling product descriptions well into the early morning hours, and personally approached local artists to convince them to let me represent their work. The first year presented countless challenges. Some days, I barely earned enough to purchase diapers and basic groceries. I would work through the night, my fingers cramping on the keyboard while Daniel slept peacefully in a crib positioned beside my makeshift desk. I learned to stretch every dollar to its absolute limit, to handle tasks myself that most people would hire professionals to complete. I consumed YouTube tutorials about marketing strategies, customer service techniques, and tax preparation, and I made every conceivable mistake along the way. But failure never frightened me. The thought of returning to my previous life terrified me far more. Gradually, circumstances began to improve significantly. Word of mouth spread throughout various communities. A popular home design blog featured Crimson Coast prominently, and suddenly, orders began flooding in from across the country. I reinvested every penny I earned back into the business, upgrading the website's functionality, hiring 3 part-time assistants, and expanding our inventory to include custom home furnishings. Before long, I was fielding serious inquiries from major cities like New York and Los Angeles. Large retail chains started reaching out, asking if I would consider exclusive partnership arrangements. I always negotiated aggressively, determined to maintain complete control over my company's direction. For once in my life, I trusted my instincts completely. Within 4 years, Crimson Coast had evolved far beyond a simple passion project. It had become a full-fledged business empire. I signed lucrative contracts with major technology companies throughout America who wanted exclusive licensing rights to some of our digital art collections for their corporate offices. Fashion brands across Europe, particularly in Milan and Barcelona, wanted to collaborate on limited capsule collections. I traveled to meetings in gleaming glass skyscrapers and historic European buildings, always presenting myself as just another freelance contractor, never revealing that I was the owner and CEO. My personal net worth climbed steadily until last year, when it reached $94 million in total assets. Sometimes I would stare at my bank statements in disbelief, half convinced there had been some administrative error. But I never allowed success to change my outward lifestyle. I continued driving my reliable old minivan, wore comfortable jeans and sweaters, and still answered phone calls from my mother as if I were just a struggling young woman in her pajamas. I purchased my parents' house in Richmond outright, eliminating their mortgage burden completely. However, I handled the transaction discreetly, allowing my mother to believe the money came from an anonymous benefactor connected to my father's church community. I sent Nathan a substantial check each month, more than enough to cover his law school loans and living expenses, but always through a shell company, so he never questioned the source of his good fortune. Even their European vacation, the trip Nathan mentioned proudly every Christmas, was secretly funded by me. My accountant managed all these transactions carefully, ensuring no one would ever trace the money back to my business. Looking back now, perhaps I should have been honest with them from the beginning. Maybe transparency would have changed their perception of me fundamentally. But the truth is, not one of them ever bothered to ask where all this financial support originated. They simply assumed father's old railroad pension covered everything, or perhaps that Nathan had generous friends at his firm. I allowed them to believe whatever convenient fiction they preferred, partly out of long-established habit, partly because I had grown weary of being constantly dismissed and undervalued. That's precisely why, after that devastating Christmas dinner, when I returned to my apartment, my real home, not the one filled with judgment and family secrets, I felt more anger than sadness. Daniel was sound asleep in the back seat, his cheeks still streaked with tears from witnessing the chaos. I tucked him into his bed gently, then sat down at my laptop, my hands steady and purposeful for the first time all day. I opened my comprehensive financial dashboard, scrolling through dozens of automatic transactions that had been supporting my family's comfortable lifestyle for years. The monthly mortgage payment for the Richmond house, the direct transfers to Nathan's account, the utility and insurance payments for Mother, the maintenance bills for Father's luxury car. Their entire world was constructed on the foundation of my work, my sacrifices, my silent generosity, and yet I remained their greatest source of disappointment. I stared at those numbers for an extended period, remembering every birthday I had spent alone, every holiday dinner where I served as the family's favorite target for criticism. Slowly and deliberately, I began canceling each automatic payment. I stopped the mortgage transfers, ended Nathan's monthly deposits, and terminated the allowance Mother received each month. I emailed my attorney, instructing her to immediately revoke the family's access to the trust fund I had established. I contacted the bank and had Father's luxury car loan transferred back to his name exclusively. My hands remained perfectly steady throughout the entire process. The actions felt cold and calculating at first, but as I worked through the comprehensive list, a new emotion grew within me, something that felt remarkably like freedom. For years, I had served as the silent benefactor, the invisible engine powering their lives, but I realized the time had come to step into the light, to live according to my own values and priorities. No more free rides for people who showed me no respect. No more silence in the face of their cruelty. When I finished making all the necessary changes, I closed the laptop and looked around my quiet, sunlit living room. Daniel's small shoes sat by the front door, his colorful drawings were taped proudly to the refrigerator. For the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere, right there in the life I had built entirely through my own efforts. And I knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, I would face them with my head held high and my dignity intact. I don't have clear memories of the flight to Maui, only that I booked it the moment I finished severing my family's endless supply of financial support and assistance. I desperately wanted to find a place where no one knew my name or my complicated history, a place where the only expectation anyone had of me was to simply exist and breathe freely. I needed the healing power of the ocean. I needed the warmth of the sun. Most importantly, I needed genuine peace. The beach house was waiting for me like a dear old friend. I had purchased it 3 years ago, just after Crimson Coast really began to flourish, telling my family it was necessary for business travel, and pretending it was a modest little condominium near the airport. In reality, it was absolutely breathtaking. A modern glass front house positioned directly on the sand, with towering windows that opened up to reveal the endless blue of the Pacific and floors that seemed to glow golden in the natural sunlight. Coconut palms lined the edges of the property, their fronds swaying gently in the constant ocean breeze. I had always dreamed of owning a home like this, serene, open, and completely mine. Daniel was exhausted when we landed, his small head nodding against my shoulder as we rode from the airport in our rental car. But when we arrived at the house and he caught his first glimpse of the ocean, he lit up like Christmas morning all over again. "Mom, there's sand right outside our door," he squealed with pure delight. His joy proved absolutely contagious. For a while, I simply watched him explore, allowing his excitement to fill the empty space where my happiness used to reside. He ran circles around the spacious living room, threw open every door he could find, and finally tumbled onto the back patio, where the beach stretched out before us like a personal invitation to paradise. The first morning, we woke to brilliant sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling glass. I brewed coffee and watched Daniel as he pressed his nose against the window, staring in wonder at the rolling waves. "Can we go outside?" he asked, his voice small but filled with hope. I nodded, still wearing my pajamas, and we carried our breakfast out to the deck. I wrapped myself in a soft blanket, eating toast, while Daniel dug his toes into the warm sand and started building his very first sandcastle. No one was there to judge me for being in pajamas at 9 o'clock in the morning, or for letting my son get sandy before finishing breakfast. There was just the gentle sound of the surf, the warmth of the tropical sun, and Daniel's laughter, echoing across the empty beach like music. Later that day, we walked along the shoreline, collecting colorful shells and smooth stones. Daniel chased after seagulls, shrieking with delight every time they took flight in formation. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt something inside me relax and unclench. I didn't have to perform for anyone. I didn't have to apologize for existing. I didn't have to worry about meeting anyone's expectations except my own. Now and then, I caught myself smiling for absolutely no reason, and the feeling was so foreign that it made me laugh out loud. At night, after Daniel was fast asleep, his hair still smelling of salt and sunshine, I would sit on the balcony with a glass of wine. The air was thick with the intoxicating scent of hibiscus and plumeria, and the ocean's endless song provided a comfort I hadn't known I desperately needed. I'd watch the sun sink slowly into the water, painting the sky in brilliant purples and golds, and think about all the years I'd spent living for everyone but myself. I thought about the sacrifices I'd made, the nights I'd stayed up working while everyone else slept, the precious moments I'd missed with Daniel, the pieces of my authentic self I'd given away for the sake of keeping peace with people who never appreciated my efforts. But here, in this house, with nothing but the stars and the ocean to answer to, I began to remember who I really was. Not just Daniel's mother, not just the family scapegoat or the secret millionaire, but a woman with dreams and desires entirely her own. I started writing again, short stories and poems that had lived in my imagination for years, creative dreams that I'd set aside while building my business and caring for my son. My laptop became my faithful companion after dark, the words flowing out of me like water after a long drought. Some nights I wrote about heartbreak, others about hope. I wrote about the girl I was and the woman I was becoming. As peace returned, I began thinking seriously about how to help others. I couldn't stop thinking of women like me, single mothers, overwhelmed and unsupported. I remembered the fear, the loneliness. I wanted to ease that journey for someone else. One afternoon, with Daniel laughing nearby, I began outlining a foundation, Haven of Hope. A safe space for single mothers with grants, legal aid, childcare support, scholarships. I committed $2 million. Every step felt powerful. For once, my money wasn't rescuing users, it was building something real. I imagined mothers and children who'd never know my name but might have a better life because of this. Daniel and I settled into our Maui rhythm, beach mornings, porch reading, laughter. The house glowed with warmth my childhood never had. One golden afternoon, my phone rang. Richmond, VA, my mother, I nearly didn't answer. But I did, her voice shook. Victoria, honey, we need help desperately. The bank called today. They say we're behind on the house payments significantly. I don't understand what happened. And your father? Well, he's not taking the news well at all. I let her words wash over me, steady and unmoved by her distress. For years, I would have panicked at a call like this, feeling like it was my sacred duty to rescue them, to smooth over every problem before it became a crisis. But now, something fundamental inside me had shifted permanently. I sat down at the kitchen table and looked out at the ocean, breathing in the calm I had finally found. Mom, I said gently but firmly, I need you to listen to me carefully, really listen. There was a long pause. She must have heard the new firmness in my voice, the complete absence of desperation. I paid for everything, the house, the bills, even the cars. You and Dad never knew the truth, but for years I made it all possible. I did it because I love you and because I wanted you to be safe and comfortable. But after what happened on Christmas, after what Dad said, after you all made me feel like an embarrassment and a failure, I stopped, feeling the old ache in my chest, but I forced myself to continue speaking. I realized I deserve better. I deserve respect, Mom. I'm not going to let anyone treat me like a failure when I built this entire family's financial security. For a long moment, the only sound on the line was her labored breathing. Then very softly, she began to cry. Not loud, dramatic sobs, just those small, broken sounds I remembered from when she lost her mother years ago. Oh, Victoria, she whispered through her tears. I'm so sorry. We didn't know. I swear to you, if I'd known the truth. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. That's just it, Mom. You never asked about my life. You never wanted to know my real story. It was always about how I didn't measure up, how I made things harder for everyone. Even after everything I did, all the sacrifices, it was never enough to make you proud. My voice wavered for a moment, but I took a deep breath and steadied it. I forgive you, Mom, but things have to change completely. I'm not your mistake to hide anymore. I'm your daughter, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. She sniffled on the other end, her words tumbling out in a desperate rush. "Victoria, please, let us make it right. Come home to us. Your father, he regrets everything. I know he does, he's just stubborn. You know how he is. And Nathan, well, he says he never wanted you to leave like that. We need you desperately. I need you." I closed my eyes and listened to the ocean outside, thinking of all the years I'd spent trying to fit into a family that never saw me for who I truly was. The old Victoria might have rushed to forgive, to forget, to erase her pain for the sake of keeping everyone else comfortable. But I wasn't her anymore. I had found my peace, and I wasn't about to give it up, not even for a tearful apology. "Mom," I said quietly, "I love you deeply. I'll always care about you, but I can't go back to how things were before. I can't pretend I don't have value just because it's easier for everyone else. If you and Dad want me in your lives, it has to be on completely different terms. I won't be your secret shame. I won't let anyone talk down to me in my own family ever again." She was quiet for what felt like an eternity, and for a moment I wondered if she would hang up. But then she said, her voice soft and raw with emotion, "You're right, Victoria. You're absolutely right about everything. I want you to be happy. I want to know you, the real you. I don't want to lose you again." I felt tears sting my eyes, but they weren't sad tears. They were the kind of tears you cry when you're finally free from a prison you built yourself. After the call ended, I sat in silence, watching the sky shift from gold to indigo, thinking about the journey here, nights building Crimson Coast from nothing, years of silent giving, of being misunderstood by those I loved. I used to measure my worth by how much I gave, how small I could be. But now I saw clearly, my value is in the life I built, the son I'm raising, and the hope I offer others. In Maui, I kept in touch with my mom. My father sent a short card, "We miss you, we're proud." Nathan called once. No grand apologies, just quiet, sincere change. For the first time, they saw me. Haven of Hope launched its first grant. I got emails from mothers I'd never met, saying they finally felt seen. And every night, I remember those simple words. Very well. They freed me. I live now not as a disappointment, but as my full, imperfect, extraordinary self.